now I just more think it's funny. Like sometimes I'll go home and I'll be talking to like one of my friend's dads from high school and he'll be like, "Oh, so you get like paid to make drawings, huh?" And I was like, "Yeah, most of the time." And he's like, "All right."
Are you looking up like you're about to freestyle? Are you looking up a verse? What is this?
No,
I would actually, if you could rap the intro, I'd really appreciate that.
We would all really appreciate that, right? Yeah.
I'm not ready for that.
Okay, well,
you want me to
no pressure.
Kick a main loop for you?
All right, waiting to dry. We out here grinding, doing our humble hustle.
This is horrible.
I don't have a verse ready for y'all to bless you with, so we're just going to get right into it. My name's Sergio Lopez.
I'm Josh Lloyd.
And we got Zach Oldenkamp on the show today.
How you doing, guys? Thanks for having me.
Looking at me awkward like, that's an intro, I guess.
No, I'm mostly just terrified, so I think that's where that's coming from.
Yeah. Yes, you were blessed with Sergio's intro. I almost want Sergio to do every intro now, just because I just am like, welcome, wait and dry. I'm Josh Lloyd. But he just puts much more effort into it.
I gotta say, yeah, I don't think you've done that one before. So,
oh, they're always original.
Yeah, so I appreciate that.
It's what I bring to the table.
Yeah. Hey, well, it's got to be something.
Well, thank you so much for doing this. I kind of want to dive deep fast, if that's all right with you.
Yeah, I'm at your whim, I guess.
Well, one of the main things I talked to Sergio a little bit about it on the drive here, but one of the things I was curious about with your work specifically, but I don't know if I'm spot on or way off, is I was like, he might be trying to do like a dark comedy in his, like do some sort of dark comedy in his artwork. And I don't know if I'm picking up on that, if that's a thing.
That's entirely possible. I would not necessarily say that would be an intention that I'm having, but would probably match my personality. So maybe it's like somewhat just coming through naturally.
Okay.
I'd be curious to hear where that's coming from.
Well, it seems like you play with like narratives of death a lot.
Oh, okay.
Maybe not. Maybe I'm totally off.
I mean, that's certainly not something I think that I would say, but that doesn't mean that you're not getting that from it, like that's pretty interesting.
But then sometimes the subject matter is kind of like light, like for instance, like the luchador mask.
Yeah.
They're kind of like, even the way you present them sometimes seems almost like a fallen hero.
Okay, so yeah, I would say that you just nailed it.
And so it's like this, like it's kind of like a hero, but at the same time, it's a professional wrestler. So I was like, I don't know if he's trying to be like kind of like dark comedy with this in a way. Okay,
I can see where you're coming from now. I would say that there may be like a little tongue in cheek in that aspect. I kind of started painting them because when I was a kid, I was like super into professional wrestling.
Okay.
And
that's cool.
I was kind of like a small kid, and the luchadors are kind of like the smaller wrestlers.
Right,
and
like Mysterio.
Yeah, exactly. Like in the American circuits. And like you can see I have like the title belts up there and stuff. So I was
with your name on them.
Yeah. Well, hey, if you're going to earn it.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think I had kind of, you grow out of things that you're into as a kid. And then when I moved out here, somebody had given me one as a gift, and it kind of reignited like all of those ideas I had and how I kind of idealized these wrestlers as kind of like these heroic figures or like even villains, because some of them, are playing heel or the bad guy. And so the way I painted them was in like this very classical, like single light down, like very dramatic way. Because in my mind, I started looking at them more like a religious thing, almost like. So the idea for them was like to have this show, and the walls would just be like lined with these paintings, almost like you're walking through this luchador Valhalla.
Right.
So yeah, I would say like in that aspect, you're like kind of on it. Like I'm definitely trying to be like, because there's a huge lineage to that kind of thing, and I want to be super respectful of that.
For sure.
And I just, something about seeing it again as an adult brought all these feelings back from when I was a kid, and just like how much I admired these people. And I haven't painted one of those in a long time. I've kind of moved on from that for the most part, but obviously I still very much enjoy them as like the 30-some hanging in my studio.
Yeah.
But you kind of nailed it with those, I would say. Yeah.
And there was even like this broken skull you painted. And when you pull back from it, it almost looks like it's a smiley face. Like there's two dots and like the jawline almost makes. I was like, I don't know if he's trying to like make it seem like a smiley face, like this iconic smiley face, and then this death, and it's like death is laughing at you kind of thing. Like I couldn't figure out if it was like trying to be comedic at all.
I think a little bit, and it was part of a show that was down in LA, and everybody got one of these like coffin panels, and I'm sort of like, I have no idea what I'm going to be able to compose that looks interesting, like inside of a coffin. Also, I don't want to just ignore the fact that it's on a coffin. Like I should probably try to incorporate that into the piece somehow. Okay. I think like, it's just going to happen whether you think it or not, and kind of like, good stuff happens, bad stuff happens. You kind of just got to laugh at all of it.
For sure.
And I guess that was sort of just the idea behind that.
Yeah.
You nailed it. Good. two for two, man. Great job.
One of the other things I mean, this has nothing to do with like the dark humor theory I have with your art, but one of the things I thought about too was we had this discussion with John Wentz about why he decides to kind of pull back from completing his artwork, and his concept behind it was that it triggers your brain and like kind of like wakens your brain to like dive deeper and by trying to complete the figure he's painting, and like I thought you kind of did that in a way, but in a different route. Like you have these very like finished pieces of like, like these graphite drawings or something, but it's like such a small segment of a scene, like where it almost forces you to complete what we're trying to, like the image. Like I know there was like, we're going to talk later about like legs, about like those. And then there's like one of like a girl like trying to take off her like bra from the back. But it's like, it's almost like that little image forces you to think of the entire almost setting of what is going to happen. Yeah,
and that's definitely intentional. I think with a lot of the graphite drawings that I've been working on over the past year and a half or so, I think the main theme that keeps coming back to me would be intimacy. And I kind of don't really mean that in a romantic way necessarily. I just think knowing myself as a person, kind of the interactions that I tend to gain a lot from would be like much more intimate actions, like, more intimate conversations and things like that.
For sure.
And so I kind of felt like, there's a million things asking for people's attention these days, like Facebook, Instagram, movies, Netflix, everything. Like there's a million things. It's so easy not to be bored. And for somebody to like look at your work and actually sit there and think about it is really hard to do. And I think kind of like a big ask, but ideally that's what you get. And I think I'm trying to make people, hopefully, if they're interested, look at it and sort of think like, okay, well, he could have done the whole back, right? Or the whole scene, but he didn't. So it's smaller, like, which kind of forces you to get a little closer to it. It's not like super dramatic lighting, I would say. So it's, again, like maybe doesn't have like a huge read from a distance. So you'd almost be like, oh, why did somebody hang a gray square on the wall? And then like get a little closer and be like, oh, okay, actually it's this thing. And like, it's sort of this alternative idea of like, well, I'm getting more intimate with the drawing, like right off the bat. And now it's like part of the piece, hopefully. But, people are going to get what they get.
Yeah, that's cool.
So is that why you're mostly using graphite these days? Because you like that? You almost feel like it's a more intimate medium?
Yeah, for me, I think so. I think there's a couple things. I've definitely always kind of associated subject matter with medium in a weird way. Like the luchador masks obviously being very colorful and like the way they are, like that's a huge part of it. So obviously drawing them is not, I think, going to do them justice. And I even like I did do a few drawings of them, and I didn't really feel like they felt like they were part of the larger body of work there. They felt like something else. And I've kind of always just been more interested in drawing. Like paintings are wonderful and great, obviously, but yeah, there's something about the immediacy of it, I think, that I really liked, where it's so easy just pull out a sketchbook from your pocket, have a pencil, and you're there, right? And there's something really attractive about that. But I also think, yeah, I don't know, there's something really interesting about it that maybe I haven't totally figured out, that I just am like really attracted to that medium. Even with a lot of artists I like, most of the work that I bought and stuff like tends to be more towards drawings.
Oh, really? Huh.
Yeah, and
That's
I think
awesome.
even when I grew up in a real small town in the Midwest, and there wasn't a lot of art around.
Where was this?
This is Allendorf, Iowa.
Oh,
it was like a population of like 40 people, I think,
really?
when I was growing
Not
up.
39.
Not 39. It was 40. And,
I mean, after you left.
Well, now, and I think now it's more like 20.
It's gotten smaller.
Yeah.
Goes down.
Oh, that's crazy.
Yeah, but it was a great place to grow up. And I think a lot of my inspiration still comes from that. Like, things there are not particularly new and shiny and sort of modern, right? Like it's kind of older things and big fields, and things are like a little dirty, and there's like, almost like you feel a sense of history just when you're looking at anything like an old barn or something. It's like
everything's got patina, but it's not like faux patina.
Yeah. It's very genuine. I think like that would be a good word to describe like that entire area. Is just like very, very genuine and kind of quiet. And I think like that is hopefully something that comes through on the drawings.
Yeah, I could totally see that.
Yeah, like I was talking to some friends and we were kind of asking this question. It's like, oh, well, what do you think your artwork sounds like? And I was like, ooh, hopefully nothing. Or maybe like crickets in the middle of the night or something like that.
That's a great question.
White noise or something?
Yeah, because I don't think it's very loud. And I don't particularly like to be a loud person, even though it's, you have a drink and then it happens, but I think in general, like I sort of gravitate towards work that's like not super loud visually, and I think graphite sort of lends itself to that quite a bit as well.
I totally see that now that you've said it.
Yeah,
it makes a lot of sense. It's awesome. Nice.
That siren is here, not in your car if you're listening to this in your commute.
That is the worst. When they add a siren to a rap song, you're like,
yeah, I know.
But anyway, so I think where I grew up influences my work quite a bit to this day.
What kind of house did you grow up in?
It was a nice, simple house. It was me and my parents, and then my older brother, who also kind of went into the arts. He is a musician. He does. I think he's a high school music director now.
Oh, really?
Which is great. And he actually was so proud of him. He just got to play some shows with Foreigner, like the old 80s band. And I was like, I was so sad I couldn't make it, because I was like, oh, that's the coolest thing ever.
That is awesome.
So, but it was like a simple, like, I think maybe like 3-bedroom house, like nothing fancy about it.
Was it suburban or like a farmhouse?
No, we weren't on a farm, but we were definitely like surrounded by them.
Right,
yeah. Okay. And then I had,
I don't think you can have like suburban areas if there's only 40 people in the city.
Well, yeah,
weird.
I would
just one little cul-de-sac
with this.
Just house no one. Yeah.
But it was very rural, like super rural, and there was like an old abandoned railroad track that you'd go walk down all the time, and like there'd be a little stream there, and
now you live in San Francisco, where it's like polar opposite.
Yeah, it was definitely an adjustment. Like I moved out here right after high school. But I think, and it took a while to sort of get used to it.
For sure.
But the nice thing about San Francisco is that it doesn't feel like a huge city, really. Right. Neighborhoods kind of tend to stick to neighborhoods a little bit, just naturally, because people here are so busy, they're so go, 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 that it's like, well, yeah, that is cool over there, but I kind of got to do this other thing, or I could go to that bar that's only like a block away,
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
So I would say,
plus it's a peninsula; it doesn't sprawl out.
Really. Exactly. So there definitely was an adjustment period, but I've been here a little over 12 years now, and it's it's definitely the new home. I wouldn't say. I was having this discussion with a couple friends earlier this year, and they're like local cityscape painters, and so to hear them and they both kind of grew up in the Bay Area, so it was interesting to hear them talk to each other about their influences and like different Bay Area painters that I had never even heard of from the past.
Oh, really?
And I was kind of sitting there and I was like, I'm not really sure how much San Francisco has like influenced what I'm doing now artistically. And I kind of almost wonder, like, if I have to do like I did with Home, where I was like, I left and then kind of figured it out, But it's been something interesting to think about ever since, and to be like, oh, what would like my paintings of San Francisco be like? How could I show like something intimate within the city that people hopefully could still relate to? Yeah, I don't know. I haven't figured it out yet, but it's definitely fun to think.
I mean,
about.
Even if you think about San Francisco, it's like being a city. It's usually a gathering of people from other places and bringing kind of their experience to the city. So in a way, it's kind of almost nailing it on the head.
Yeah. And I think I'd be really interested in maybe seeing the way people arrange their apartments, or kind of like even the way people dress here is so unique from the people around them, kind of in a really cool way that like I'm always interested in maybe like representing somebody through the clothes they wear, or like their space that they live in, because I think without thinking about it, like we could have the same shirt, but through our daily routines and stuff, like 3 months later, that shirt's probably going to look like kind of different. Right. Like, oh, maybe you wear it like mountain biking or something and it's all wrecked up, or like, there's, who knows, right? But I really do think that.
Yeah, that was one of the things I noticed, like going back to how I was saying, you kind of like focus on a little thing and it forces you to think of things outside. I noticed that with how you would paint or draw people's like clothes in a small pile, and you could almost see a person who would wear a jacket hung up. And you could kind of like imagine a person that would wear that jacket in a weird way. It forces you to think of the person without actually seeing anyone or seeing a small segment of it. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. How it forces you to do that.
And that's super cool to hear, because that is like definitely the goal.
Yeah, that's awesome.
It's kind of like you guys kind of go and visit other people's spaces all the time. There's a podcast now, and I'm sure you could notice things and be like, oh, well, this guy's interested in this, and like, this guy has a little bit more wear and tear on his stuff versus this guy likes to keep things super clean, know, and it's like that's a huge part of who we are as people and our personalities. And I'm definitely, I don't know if I'm like more interested in representing somebody that way versus just straight up drawing them as a portrait, but I would say I definitely think about it more. Like, I think it's interesting to see people in that way. Like, I don't see very well, so when I'm trying to find friends and crowds and stuff, I'm definitely more looking for like the type of things they wear and certain things like that, just because I'm not going to catch their faces. Like, I just am not going to see it. So maybe that's also part of that.
That's crazy.
But I definitely think it's an interesting, I don't know. I think it's like a very interesting way to tackle portraiture. And it's something that I find super interesting. Anyway,
yeah,
you know?
I think it's very interesting. Just the whole idea of being able to kind of it's one of the big things I think when people are drawn to a portrait or someone or something like that, it's usually because it somewhat reminds them of someone a lot of times, or a time in their life or something like that. And I think being able to kind of like focus on other details that will make you think of the past, because usually you're drawing back into yourself when you're consuming any form of art usually. And your past experiences. So to kind of have someone see you doing a almost like a portrait of someone or a still life of some, I don't even know how to describe that, but of someone.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. It's, it's hard to talk about, right? Mm-hmm. Because it's like, well, it's a portrait without somebody being in there. So do you call it a portrait or do you call it a still life or like,
it's like a still life of a human being.
Yeah. I mean, I think essentially the still lives I tend to be more interested in are kind of things like that. Like if you look, I think the thing that naturally kind of drew me to that conclusion would have probably been looking at Andrew Wyeth's work quite a bit. Just super inspiring. And I think he is sort of the king of that almost, to where like even a lot of his interiors, or like he'll draw a tree, but this tree is like, I don't know, in a weird way, like scary, but not in like a spooky Halloween tree,
Yeah.
And the way he handles portraiture was like really, really unique, I feel like, and all about the people. And he had a retrospective up in Seattle this year. There was like a big celebration of his work, and I flew up there for that, and spent like 3 hours just walking around and looking at his work. I had never seen it in person before, and I completely blown away, because he's definitely been one of my biggest influences in a lot of ways. And he has this like drawing of a rock on a hill, but like in some ways I couldn't help but think that like this to you is like a huge part of where you live, like not just because it's rock on a hill, but also like it somehow represents like the strong people. Like he was really interested in these strong personalities of all these people who lived around him, like old military generals and things like that, that it's like you couldn't help but think that maybe it also had something to do with that. And he kind of, you could sit there and just paint fruit or whatever, and that's totally cool. Like there's nothing wrong with that at all. If that's what you want to do. But it's cool to look at different artists and sort of see like, oh, this guy likes painting fruit, and this guy likes doing a weird rock in the middle of a field for some reason. And like, let's look at their other bodies of work and see like, is there something more going on there? And like, that's the type of stuff like I really seem to enjoy looking into. And I think over the past couple of years, kind of learning more about modern art and a little bit more of the contemporary things like that. Those guys, not all of them, but some of them I think have these like super unique ideas behind what they're doing. That is like super fascinating, and like whether artistically I would have understood it without reading about it, is a different thing. But they have these phenomenal ideas, and that was super inspiring to me, just to be like, wow, I should really think about what I'm trying to do, and it's hard. Like that's super hard work, right? Because you have to really sit there and like, I have a full-time job where I do concept art for games, which is great. But then I have to want to come home and work on gallery stuff. And that's got to be a different thing for me. And there's some people who do it and it's kind of similar. And I think that's super cool too. Some of my favorite people do work like that. But personally, I just wanted it, the concept art is like this big collaborative effort, which is like one of the coolest things about it. But then I come home and now it's like, well, this is just me now. So it's like, and you can draw whatever you want.
Right.
Like, there's no rules. We have decided as a society, like, you can literally, anything can be art. That's what we've decided. So, like, what are you going to do? And it's like, that's a really hard question to answer. And I don't think, you know, I'm sure the answer is going to change, like, throughout your life. Like, your interests are going to change.
For sure.
But,
hopefully.
Yeah, hopefully, right?
Yeah.
But, you know, honestly, I painted a paper bag, like, 5 or 6 years ago, and like now I've been doing them again, and I'm like, God, these are so great. Like, I don't know why I like paper bags so much, but here they are. But you know, like, I just think it's really important to take that time. And at the end of the day, it just turns into like, well, what do you want to do? Like, there's a ton of things you can be interested in. And I think that's like where I struggled a lot early on, to where it's like, oh, I have all these influences and all this kind of art I really like. And I would make these pieces kind of like that, but you know, it just seems like a cheap knockoff, or like, you know, and maybe not to other people, but at least to myself it did. And eventually I just had to sit down and be like, you know, I really like that stuff, but I don't think that's maybe the direction I should go in, because wherever they're pulling that from, like, I don't have that. Like, that's not a thing that I have. So I should try to look at what I do have and like what I think would be more honest to go forward.
Right. For sure. I think it totally reads like your artwork. The more you talk about it too, the more I'm like, oh yeah, I could totally see even the things with the modern art thing where you were saying they had like this, you know, this like great concept behind it or something. And I think one of the great things with like a lot of artists nowadays is almost like they're taking parts of what the modern artists were doing, but they're also, you know, you were saying like, if I didn't read it, I might not have known. Right. And I think a lot of artists nowadays are trying to tackle that dilemma of like, I don't want you to have to read it to know necessary or not, you know, like to kind of pull something of what I'm trying to say, a hum of what I'm trying to say without having to like be told. Because I think there is something, you know, as an artist, there is something about you want it to have some sort of longevity to it, is my assumption, you know, so like you don't want, it's like to compare it to music, it would be like a song you loved and then 5 years later you listen to it and you're like, wow, that's a horrible song. It was just of the time or something.
Yeah.
You know, and then you listen to songs, you know, like the oldies or whatever, Hendrix, whatever, you're like, oh, yeah, that's forever good.
Yeah, it's interesting to put it that way, because you can definitely hear music from the 70s and like recognize it as that, but to just like, it holds up, right? Like, man, I'll still like listen to the Doors all day. You know what I mean? Yeah, it can really be crippling, I think, to worry about that stuff. Like, for a long time, I hit a rut to where you almost are just like completely psyching yourself out, to where it's like, well, I'm not going to like this drawing in a month anyway. And like, you know, like, what if my peers think it's dumb? And, you know, like these are like really hard things to deal with sometimes. And the way I figured out how to get over that was just to be like, you know, dude, like, as long as you honestly thought it was a good idea and like had some sort of an idea you're willing to stand behind, like, that's really all you can hope for. And, you know, keep growing, keep pushing yourself after that. But not everything you're going to draw or paint is going to be a slam dunk. Like, it's just not realistic.
Yeah. But one thing I was meaning by longevity was more like you allow, at least I think one of the flaws with like the modern art that was so conceptual and lacking of like anything you can pick up without kind of doing research is that maybe in like 100 years, or say if all data is lost or something, then that painting almost loses what they were pursuing in a way. Where kind of, if you allow yourself to have, you know, more of like things that are representational or something, you allow that like longevity to at least have a chance. In my opinion, I don't know.
No, I think there's probably some truth to that. It's really tricky, right? Because I remember being a younger artist and kind of looking at Van Gogh's paintings and just like totally not getting it. Like, I'm like, these are cool, but I don't necessarily understand like why this is a big deal artistically, which is just an obvious sign of my own shortcomings.
Right.
But like the more I read about it and kind of read about his life and sort of what he was trying to do, it's like, oh wow, okay, like yeah, I get it, and it's really, you know, as usual, it's just me being a dumb and like not knowing, you know, and like, you know, I didn't know how to think about art, and and I don't know if a lot of people have that problem, but I definitely did. Like, music can use all these tools, and movies can use all these tools, like a whole bunch of tools to like help you to understand something. But like, and art can do that too, but I think it's really challenging for me to just be like, oh, look at this picture, good luck. Like, you know, I put some clues in there, but you know, it's not like a song's playing to help you like understand the mood necessarily. I
also think like art kind of it there's always like an edge trying to be like, it's always trying to be pushed forward, and it's always being built upon other art. So like Van Gogh is almost like watching a comedy from like the like, I don't know,
dark comedy maybe,
like from like back in the day, comedy. You know, where like a fart joke was edgy back in the day or something, and they're like, and you watch it now and you're like, that's not that funny, because it's like it's built upon those that can't. It's like you have to meet that edge. So
for sure, I think understanding like historical stuff in particular, like you definitely, it's on you to like understand what their life was like and sort of what was happening in the art community at that point. And that's like, that's extra work that you have to put in. But like, the more I do it, like the more I'm glad I did it, because it like brings this whole new understanding. And that sort of is what led me into looking at the modern art again and being like, you know, I don't really get this, but that's probably my fault. So I should work a little harder. And it's like only been beneficial, I think. And
that's probably a good mindset. I'm usually going in with the opposite mindset.
Right. Well, and I definitely used to be like that. And it was just kind of like, I don't know, at the end of the day, I'm like, we're all just trying to do stuff, you know, and like no one's trying to waste their own time, you know what I mean? So they must have had a reason. And sometimes you're like, oh, well, I don't really dig that, even though that's your thing. But I do dig that you at least tried, and like, you know, that's me personally. Like, there's probably a million other people who do dig it, which means this is for them. Like, that's awesome.
Yeah, and I do appreciate if someone's putting some effort into the idea behind whatever they're creating. I always just feel like they're trying to get over on me with like some like, you know, like they're trying to be like, we're super like, if you don't understand, like I always get, that's like my pushback usually is like, are you guys like full of it, or is this like a real thing?
I mean, it's like undeniable that some people probably are full of it. Like, but I feel like that's no different than any other aspect in life, right? Like some people are like totally going to know what they're talking about, and like other people are just going to, like the art is not unique for them. I don't feel like. Maybe we're extra sensitive to it because it's like with what we do. Right. But I sort of, I don't know. At this point, I'm kind of just like, all right, cool. Well, like, I want to know like what's going on. And if their answer is also just like, well, I don't know, I just thought like that looked really cool. I'm like, but that's good enough for me, man. Like, I that's cool too. Like, I think that's a great reason to do something, you know?
Yeah. I suppose. I'm still.
Well, hey, I'm not. You know, I'm not trying to change you. I'm just, you know.
I appreciate it.
Yeah. I double appreciate it. That's my reason for most of my work.
There's nothing wrong with that. You know, I think as long as you're like just honest with it, right? Like, as long as like, well, why did you like draw that? And it's like, oh, well, I don't know. I thought it looked cool, and it's like, oh, yeah, good enough, dude. Like, great job. Like, I think that's great.
Yeah, I mean. To go back to your art, I kind of mentioned it earlier, but it seemed like I was way off when I was like, oh, you seem to like talk about death a lot in your work. And then you seemed like you weren't talking about death. And I was like, oh, maybe I'm like dead. Because like for instance, like you do like those like magnolia flowers or something, right?
Yeah,
and that's
I
always think like a lot of times when people are like really focused on like a flower, I think it's like a temporary thing, right? Of beauty that fades and wilts and dies. I don't know. Maybe I'm just a dark person.
No, I think that's a fair association to make with flowers.
And you know, you have like the people that are sleeping, and
right.
And then you have like these like hung masks that we mentioned where it seems like
sure.
And I was like, oh, maybe he's like, that's kind of, but there's always like the guy, like, I don't know if we want to just kind of go into those the sleep painting.
Oh, sure.
We're going to bring up.
Oh yeah, here, let me pull it up too so I can.
So there's it's a graphite drawing you did on a Moleskine for the Spoke Art Moleskine show, I believe.
Yeah, that was for the Moleskine show last year. It was
okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and the title is called "Blue as Your Blood."
Yeah, and
that's another thing. Like a lot of your titles, like that was another thing. Like I was like, oh, I can't tell if he's trying to be funny. Or like slightly funny or because even your sleeping ones, they all seem to have like almost like the titles seem like an afterlife or something like that.
That's interesting. I hadn't considered that. I think just because of my personality, I will probably naturally try to like be a little tongue in cheek. I'm sort of, I think that just is who I am as a person a little bit.
Okay.
Which is maybe not the most appropriate for these drawings. But I apparently I just can't help myself. With these, I would say like that was a drawing that I felt was like the first successful drawing I had done. That was like kind of going to start the next thing after the luchador masks.
Okay.
I was sort of like lost a little bit. So I knew this would be like going back to the intimacy type stuff we were talking about, right? To where it's like sort of these really intimate moments.
Right.
And yeah, I feel like this piece was probably like the start of that. Like sort of the first one where I was like, yeah, okay, like I think I'm not there, but like I'm at least starting to like feel like the search visually.
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully that's coming across in some ways. Yeah, I guess when you asked me to like pick some pieces to talk about, that one kind of stood out to me because of that, to where I was like, yeah, this feels like the first one where I was really starting to feel it out a little bit clearer.
Going in like a direction that you...
Yeah, because I'm not usually the type of person with my own work who's trying to sort of say a big thing in one piece.
Mm-hmm.
Like I feel like that's a lot of pressure and I don't want it. So
yeah,
I would sort of like a body of work to work together and sort of like help describe itself.
For sure.
And this sort of felt like the first piece of that puzzle.
Okay.
Kind of like, oh yeah, like I think, and that was also the first time I had like hired somebody and like found a hotel that kind of looked like a room, not just like a hotel room,
Okay.
And just because I don't want to like, oh yeah, come to my apartment and like take these pictures person I only kind of know. Like, I wouldn't blame somebody for being weirded out by that. So I was like, well, here's like a safe place and it just hopefully feels like somewhat lived in and like this very natural moment. Like I kind of
don't mind the blood on the walls.
Yeah. Oof, God, that's terrible.
I didn't have time to clean.
Yeah. Just to be clear, there are no blood on the walls. No, I guess maybe the death association comes from almost like a peaceful feeling from it. I certainly had not had that in mind.
Maybe I just looked into it. Maybe I'm the dark one. Maybe. That's a realization I'm going to come to by the end of the show.
Yeah, and maybe there is like some...
Because what I thought was, I saw these people sleeping, and I was like, obviously they're sleeping.
Yeah.
But
well, that's good.
I didn't think they were dead. I just thought like, oh, maybe you're kind of playing around with like sleep and like final sleep and like these ideas. and how someone can look very beautiful in like the natural state of being asleep, and how like everything seemed like it was like almost like maybe I just started building a narrative and then everything just ended up being associated with it in my own way. I was like, oh, bringing it back to this thing is what I'm thinking. But
yeah, I mean, well, that's a hard thing to think about too. Like what level of ownership do you have over the idea?
Right.
Which is like, I don't have the answer for that. And that's like, yeah, it's fun to think about a lot, but like I keep basically just being like, yeah, well, I guess it's just really complicated and here we are. Yeah, I would say that the goal is kind of like we talked about earlier, like really hitting those quiet moments. And I kind of try to, for me, the sleeping thing comes from a lot of like, you know, I tend to stay up late and work late. So when I've had like girlfriends or whatever spend the night, you know, like obviously they go to bed much earlier than I do. And I always have, you know, I always think of these like really quiet moments where it's just like, you know, everyone's asleep. You know, I'm maybe just getting ready to call it a night or something. And like, it's just this very peaceful, like serene, but also like very intimate setting that I think is really easy to skip over, right? Or like really easy to not notice or not think about because it's such a daily occurrence for a lot of people that hopefully I'm like calling some attention to it to where people are like, oh, you know, like these are like really nice moments, and like maybe I should think about that a little bit more.
That's way more nicer than I.
Yeah, well,
this is like all like very beautiful, and I'm like, God, that is great. Like I love that. Like I really like that whole idea. I just went dark, which is fine. I think the other thing is like a lot of your work has this very dark shadow. I think that's what kind of started the triggering of like the like, oh, like there's these hard shadows and then like this softness, like your graphite has like really soft skin and then they'll have like hard shadows and you're like, oh, I think he's playing with these like soft and like dark and hard and I don't know, I just started building.
I do think there's definitely like an overarching like melancholic type of feeling to that. Like I could see that being true for sure. And I guess the dark shadows just sort of come from at the time, like I was, you know, from the school days, like mostly used to working with like, you know, single light source back from like the traditional atelier style learning. Right. And just also the way like my room is naturally set up, you know, it's really like a main light source and that's just, so it's just sort of natural. I have recently kind of started doing like a little bit more, natural light setups and like a couple pieces I've done this year, but I think that also comes from, you know, during the day when the sun's out, like I'm at work, so most of like my more intimate interactions come like at night, you know, just naturally, and so that is probably like some sort of subconscious effect on that. I would say that maybe I didn't consider completely, but it is interesting now that we're talking about it.
That is cool. Huh, that's interesting. I mean I love that whole, I'm so happy. I mean I went into this with like such a darker thought of it, and then now when I'm like more of like layers of what you're trying to say come out, I'm much more like, oh, that's like so great, and so like there is something magical about even the sleeping women, like that whole thing is like it is kind of what I love about art is how it pulls you back to your experiences.
Yeah, absolutely.
And just you explaining that is like, oh yeah, like that is great. Like that is something like intimate and special. Like you're when I get pulled away from the darkness, then it's like, oh yeah, that's like beautiful and like spot on, like you nailed it.
It's cool to hear, because I don't talk about it that much, so it's like nice to hear that it's like, oh well, no, that does make sense. Like yeah, that's cool. I appreciate that. Yeah,
that's cool. For your titles of like your works, how do you go about that?
It's like almost my least favorite part of the entire thing. Like I'm always like incredibly tempted to just be like, this is entitled number 15 or whatever. Like You know,
I did that for a painting. We did an episode where we talked about like a guy he did like the blue number 57. It was just like a blue painting, and then so I did and then we started talking about people that title their paintings like super over the top.
Yeah, which I think sometimes I feel like I borderline do, and it makes me like a little nervous.
And so I did this painting of like it was very colorful and very bright, and I titled it like Blue 57 or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it can be really important because it's like another tool we have to like try and maybe help somebody along with the work and like what our intentions are. Yeah, I wouldn't say that I'm proud or like, oh, I totally nailed that one, you know, for titles. Like I wouldn't say that like I'm killing it by any means. For me, a lot of it comes from trying to think about something like a little bit more abstractly. Like I pretty much all of my Friday nights now are like go to a bar and like have a couple of drinks and like sit down and like try to think about stuff and like do a little, like I carry this little sketchbook in my back pocket and like, you know, always trying to write things and sometimes maybe, I don't know. It's tough to talk about because I don't completely feel like I have thought a lot of them through enough. You know what I mean? Like the heroes and villains were easy. The luchador masks, it was like hero number 7, and like you know, and every so often one of them was like a little bit more unique. These are a little bit tougher because it's really easy to like walk that edge of like, oh, this is way too pretentious, or like way too obvious, you know. And I'm also super influenced by like some of the music I listen to that kind of helps me get into the mindset, and I sort of will pull things from that a little bit and be like, oh man, like that's a beautiful way to say this thing, or like a really interesting way to say this thing. And so like I don't know. I guess I'm failing at this hard because I don't think that like I'm like good at it enough to really describe like where they're coming from entirely, other than like I'm trying to think of the feeling and like maybe specific moments or phrases I've heard that kind of like inspired me to make that image, or like have the same sort of feeling that I think the image has, and kind of carrying it through that way.
Do you ever work like that? Title first and then the image?
No. No. Unless I think I have like something funny. And then maybe I would do that. But I don't think that that my brain works that way naturally.
That would be a weird thing to do, I think, in general.
It might be an interesting idea for a group show, right? Like everybody's painting is going to be named to this, right? And like, so now you have to figure out like what that is to you or something. Like, I think that, I don't know, maybe that could be fun. But no, I don't think that's ever happened. I think maybe something close to that would be like, there will be like a song lyric that like I continuously resonates in my head or something, and maybe that will lead to the creation of an image. So maybe that's pretty close to what you're talking about. But I never have the title. Like I'm literally coming up with the title usually while I'm like or finalizing the title while I'm like sending the email to the gallery to be like, here's that information you need. Like I usually have like a list to pull from, or like especially now, because I feel like a lot of the work I'm doing is like kind of all part of the same body of work. I kind of have like a list of things that have inspired that I pull from once in a while. And some of them I'll be like, oh yeah, like that one kind of nails that. Title first would be interesting. Well, maybe I should think about it more. Yeah, I don't know.
I just thought because I did that like Bukowski show.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking of. So that's why you're like, that's a weird way to do it. Like, wait, you've done that.
It's a genius way to do it, is what I meant to say. It's a really cool way.
I'm really lagging behind you.
You're coming off very confident, and
it's the booze.
Nice. Do you think you'll go back to oil painting at some point, or are you pretty stuck on? I mean, I'm assuming you're not going to just throw it to the wind.
No, I mean, I do still actively do like little still life studies. Like,
yeah, it looks like you have a little study going.
Yeah, like I would say currently, like all the ideas I sort of have right now of like finished pieces I want to make, that's just like naturally they just feel more like graphite drawings to me, or charcoal, I guess, whatever. But just drawings, like they really, for some reason, I feel like I can say what I want to say better and more accurately, like through drawing, and you know, there's also just the personal inclination of like that's just what I also tend to prefer. I definitely am not done with painting. Like I definitely have paintings in the future I know I'd like be really interested in doing, but I'm sort of trying to just focus on hitting that like body of work right now, just because that's where I really feel strongly, and I still feel like I have a lot of things to say. And even like some of the things I'm sort of thinking about in the future, I'm like, oh yeah, that's still drawings though, you know, like
right. And they're amazing. I mean, I like am really into your drawings in general. They're just really great, really well done.
Yeah, likewise.
I appreciate that a lot. Yeah.
So I don't want you to stop. So.
Yeah, I really can't. I really can't see
Josh.
me, walking away from it. I'm just enjoying it so much, and I don't know.
I think that comes across usually. You know, like when you're happy in your medium, I think you just end up being more passionate about pieces and
that makes sense.
Focused and things like that. And I think it just comes across like if you're not happy with what you're doing, that's also can come across too. So it's
definitely.
You know, and I think it's all about trying to figure that out and stay on that kind of like momentum of enjoying your art. You know, I don't know. I would hate what I'm doing.
Yeah, well, of course, right? Yeah, that's
what my job is for.
Yeah, and I think, you know, we all probably do art for a lot of different reasons at the end of the day, and as long as you're like trying to figure those reasons out and sticking to that, like I think you're gonna have a good time, sort of. And yeah, there are days where I'm like, man, this is just like not working, but it is 1 a.m. and I have to go to bed. Like I have to get up for work tomorrow and stuff. So, and that's when it's like really frustrating because you know it's not working and stuff, but it's all I can think about the next day, right? So I'm like, I got to get back to it. Like I really got to get back to it. And each drawing is kind of done a little differently. Like I don't have like a very direct process anymore. Just because I did, and it just started to really become a grind, and like that's not fun. And also, you're looking at all these different other people who are doing things with drawings that like I don't understand. I'm like, man, how did he do that? And like I want to figure that out. You know what I mean? So I'm always trying different stuff, or like hitting up people on Instagram. And I'm like, well, what do you mean you painted with charcoal? Like, tell me about that, dude. And like, and like everybody's always super cool about it, you know, and like. I've met some really cool people just through Instagram where they're like, oh, well, if you kind of do this thing on this paper, like it works like this. I'm like, man, I did not know. Like, I have to try that, you know? And it just is all, you know, it's all just in the name of like keeping things fresh because, you know, like the ideas should be the exciting part. Like the idea should be the like, yeah, like I really have something to say here or like something I'm excited about talking about. And then the drawing part, you know, you don't want it to just, I'll be like, okay, well, here comes the slag. Like now I have to spend like 100 hours making this image. You know, you want to be like, yeah, all right. Like now let's see if we can pull it off, you know?
Yeah.
So you try to make both sides like as fun as possible. And, you know.
And I think that comes with what you're saying about like the great thing about like, for instance, I don't know, jiu-jitsu or something is like that it's a life of learning that art form, right? So us as painters, it's like the one of the great things about it is that you can always learn something new, and that kind of allows that freshness and that like momentum to keep going. It's just, you know, you just kind of have to force yourself to do that or hunt that out. Which is great.
Absolutely, yeah. And somebody had like written this article online, and like one of the, I don't know if it was the title or one of the pieces of advice, but it was like the best thing you can do as an artist is like learn how to like keep teaching yourself. And I'm like, yeah, that's got to be true. Like that's got to be true. Like because it's gonna stop you from hitting like you're gonna hit roadblocks no matter what. But like learning how to like be in touch with yourself and be like, why am I not enjoying this? And like, if you sit down and think about it, like you're going to figure it out.
Right.
And it's so important to like trust your instincts and just be like, yeah, I don't know, like something's got to change. Or like, you can always tell. Like, I feel like your brain always knows, and you're like, well, I know I'm unhappy, but like, maybe I don't quite understand like why I'm unhappy. It's super helpful. I feel like to be able to think about those things.
Yeah, I think so. Does having a job that's creative, does that kind of affect your creating at home at all?
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely, but I think mostly positively.
Okay.
Like I love doing, the video game work. It's super fun. You're drawing like all these things you would have never drawn if it was up to you, like in a million years, which is really cool. And I feel like in my case in particular, the problems I'm tackling are like very different from my day job versus coming home and working on my own stuff. There's definitely nights where I'm like, whoa, there's like this really interesting piece of crossover here that like I didn't see coming, because both jobs are definitely like trying to get people to understand what they're looking at. I think maybe in different ways, but you're still like using that knowledge. In the technical practices, like you can't beat it. Like I'm still, trying to become a better draftsman always, and being able to draw all day, being able to draw all day, like even if it's not like sleeping girls or weird skulls, it's like, you're still learning to draw, you're still training your eye, and like you're still problem solving. And it's also the cool part of it
until they make
different.
that video game Sleepy Girls and
right
weird skulls.
Coming 2020, Zach Studios. It's gonna be free, don't worry about it. Yeah, it's it's just such a creatively different part of your brain a lot of the times, I feel like. And the fact that it's so collaborative is something I really love about it too, to where it's like not, somebody's actually usually coming up with like an initial idea to where they're like, well, what is this? I don't want to say anything because I don't want to get in trouble. So it's like, what does this thing look like? And I'm like, well, I actually don't know.
What does
like,
this dragon look like?
Yeah. And I'm like, oof. You talking to the wrong guy. Like, I don't know about dragons, but I'll give it a shot. Like,
right. It's just like a lot of like logical design behind it. Is that what?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely part of it. But I think it's also very different from project to project, team to team, company to company, like what they need from you.
That's interesting. Sounds kind of fun.
Oh, it's a blast. Like I feel super lucky to be able to have that as my day job, and then to the nice thing about it too is just like it takes a lot of pressure off of the trying to move the drawings, right? Like I currently, it could always change in the future, but currently like do not have to worry about if something sells. Right. Like it's always really cool when it does, and like I really appreciate it, but I currently and like don't stress about it. Like I really am fortunate to be able to be in this position and like mostly just worry about making the work that I want to make versus work that I think like people will be interested in buying. Right. Because drawings in general are kind of harder to move. People, for whatever reason, I guess I don't even want to speculate on it, but
you could say it because people are.
No, I wasn't going to say that. I just, I think it's just maybe for whatever reason not as globally appealing. Maybe I don't
understand what I love graphic drawings or graphite drawings. Like that's like one of my favorite things when done really well. I'm like, God.
Yeah.
I don't know if it can get better.
And I think like a lot of the drawings I love are kind of in the same league as mine. A lot of the drawings I love are like completely on the other side of the fence to where they're more like just line work and like really beautifully done stuff. Like actually most of the drawings I own are kind of along more of those lines. And those guys are like the real MVPs, dude. Those guys are the ones who like can draw amazingly and like don't have to hide it with value like I do. And like, you know, they're just incredible draftsmen. Yeah, but for whatever reason, you know, it's just not as like attractive of a thing. And like, I'm so thrilled that I don't have to think about that right now and just can like hope the work stands on its own and like hope people will like it.
Yeah. I think people are just also really attracted to color.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah.
Color's
There's that part of it too.
A thing that's appealing.
Oh, definitely. I mean, I like paintings, you know, so I get it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. It's also probably fun to, you know, like you were saying earlier, like with your titles that sometimes you're like, oh, they might be too pretentious or something, but it must be fun to have like a video game thing where it's almost like that's probably like you can let your wildness, you can just be like, oh, I can go as crazy as I want and not have to think like, is this too like over the top? Is there?
Yeah, you do still have those thoughts, but it's in like a very different way. Like I'm not sure if I've ever like drawn this weird monster and been like, is this too pretentious? Like,
or subtle? Is it subtle? You know what I mean? Like,
I do think there are projects that you would probably really have to think about those things, right, and sure. Like I just haven't been a part of something like that yet. But I would say like, going back to earlier to where like my personal work is like not particularly loud. I think like sometimes it really helps the other stuff to be super loud. Like, right. Oh, we need you to create this like cool Halloween thing like that people are going to want. And I'm like, you know, it's cool. Skulls. No, it's even cooler. Skulls on fire. Like, you know what I mean? And it's just like, well,
say no more.
Yeah, it's cool to dip into that side, dude, to just be like, well, what's fun? Like, because I grew up playing video games, and I'm like, what do I think would be like just fun to run around with? I'm like, if my head was on fire, I think that'd be pretty fun. You know what I mean? Like, you know, and it doesn't work for everything, obviously, but for like certain titles, it's just like, oh, yeah, dude, like, that's great. Like, look at that guy running around with his head on fire. Like, I wish I could do that. It's like, well, you can for $2. Like, you know?
It's the guy who created Ghost Rider. That's all I was thinking.
Yeah. Which is
the third coolest thing? Put a motorcycle.
Yeah, and it's like, yeah, you're right, dude. You nailed it. So I think in that also, like, you know, going back to, like, sort of the dark humor we were bringing up, I think this part is just, like, sometimes things just get to be really fun. Right. You know what I mean? Or like, they're like, oh, I need you to take these guns and make them look Christmassy. And then you sit there like, nah, I didn't just hear that. Because like, how does that make sense? But then you like really get to have fun, like thinking of all these different ways to like
put a red glowing nose on it.
Yeah, right. So it's really cool to try and like solve these problems, because you're dealing with things like, well, can the game do that? Like, do we have technical limitations, right, you know, to where it's like, no, we can't do that. Like, we can't make your gun snow and like all these things. So
you can't make my gun. That is hilarious.
That's a real conversation I've had. and it's very exciting in terms of it just being like a completely different type of design challenge. Mm-hmm. And like, I'm in no rush to like get out of it and only start doing one versus the other. I think I used to go back and forth on that quite a bit. But I really do like the situation I'm currently in. And I think it lends like a certain amount of, certain amount of like ability to just not worry about stuff, right? And like really focus on like, well, what do you want to do? Like, you don't worry if it sells because you got this other thing to cover that. Like, just really make what you want to make. That's hard enough, and that's like a forever pursuit. You know, like taking as many challenges out of the way of that as possible. Like, I'm all for it. Like, especially if I'm having a great time at work too. It's like,
yeah.
It's like any job. Not every day is going to be your favorite day, but I'm still like on the train ride, like, man, I got to draw a dinosaur today, and like somebody paid for that, and like that's pretty great. Like,
yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, like high school me would be like so stoked about like what I'm doing. Like I try to remember that. I'm like, yeah, dude, like this is what it was all about in a weird way. Like, yeah, it's cool.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, I have a job that I hate, but it's that freedom that is the reason why I do it. It's like, it's just to have the freedom to say, like, I can paint whatever I want. I don't have to sell anything. I don't have to worry about anything. I just am trying to make what I think is the best artwork I can create, hopefully. And that's the only, that's the grind, like, that I'm willing. But, it's like,
right.
It's that dilemma of like, well, we've talked about it before, just the sacredness of art to me is just what I'm willing to do for it is hate my job for 8 hours, which is perfectly fine.
Yeah. Right. Well, you're making a trade-off one way or the other, right? Yeah. So the trade-off of having the job is like, you don't have as much of your day's energy to like put into this other thing like that, versus the other trade-off, which is like, well, how do I make sure I'm doing what I'm doing, but make sure it's succeeding? And like, I don't think I ever would have painted the Luchador Mask series if I like had to like leave school and jump like right into making money off, because I'm like, even while I was doing them, like I have no idea what the audience for this is going to look like, or like what the ceiling of that is, or anything. And like, I got really lucky, like thanks to social media, to like find a lot of people who like thought they were pretty cool and were really supportive of it, which was great. But you also like just can't rely on that, so you make a trade-off, right? So it's, up to each individual person to figure out like what's going to work best for them, or what they're willing to say yes or no to.
For sure.
But it's cool. It's very cool.
Yeah, that's awesome. I like that. That's super cool. We were going to talk about another drawing with a second drawing.
Oh, yeah.
What's it called again?
That doesn't have a title on this one.
Good. We can just skip it. We don't have to talk about the title.
Yeah. Title schmeidel is what I always say.
Yeah.
But yeah, so this kind of goes back to what we were talking about a little bit earlier, how you'll do kind of this segment of what seems to be a full thing, like you're like the viewer of this piece would have to, like, it kind of forces you to imagine everything from the kneecaps up and kind of the environment they probably are in. And
and hopefully, there are some clues like that they're sitting on like the type of sofa and like the hardwood floors and stuff like that. Yeah.
And there's like this, I don't know if you want to call it tension or whatever, but with her feet, it's like this, the way they're angled and kind of like tippy-toed-ish.
A little, a little bit, yeah.
That, I don't know, it's almost like flirtatious in a way, but very subtle.
Yeah, I would think I was trying to like come with a little bit like of a fun sensibility with it, while still keeping the piece like a...
So were you very particular about the position of everything in it?
Yeah. And, you take like a ton of photos, trying different things out, and then you have to spend all this time like going through them and seeing what's working and what's not working.
And the one that you like is too blurry.
Yeah, that definitely happens. I think, that was not like an accident for sure. It was definitely part of the idea walking in, and it's funny to think of this now, because I feel like if I could have redone it, I would have maybe zoomed out just a little bit slightly, just so, because I wanted to get like the edge of like a dress or something in there, and I didn't end up working. Like when I was working on the piece, I was like, oh, well, maybe I can fit it in. And like, I kept kind of trying it, and I was like, it's just, I would have to like really redraw this whole thing and like kind of expand it. It was kind of like, hopefully like the lighting is very much like on the darker end of things. Like it's very low key, which hopefully
for sure.
kind of for me feels like a very homey, warm sort of interior.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. It feels definitely like someone's house.
Yeah, perfect.
Like almost like how you were explaining like your town. It feels like an older house, like a parent's house almost.
Yeah, which is perfect. Like even the apartment I live in, like it's a nice place, but this is definitely like an older building,
mm-hmm.
and it's got character to it.
Right.
You know what I mean? And I wouldn't change that for anything. Like, and I hope that is also, in the drawings a little bit as well.
Yeah,
but
yeah, I think so. And then, so you wanted a dress because that was like the thing was like I assumed it was like supposed to be like a nude.
Yeah, and I did kind of want it to be somewhat ambiguous.
Mm-hmm.
And I think like the more I was working at it, the more I realized like I think it maybe would have been a little bit stronger. Or maybe that's the wrong word. I'm not sure if stronger is the right word, but I think maybe it would have done a little bit more what I was hoping for with just like a little bit of cloth there.
Mm-hmm.
I have had some people message me or talk to me, and they're like, "Oh, I really love that thing you just posted. Like, it's so like sexual, but in like a very classy way." And I'm like, "Oh, that's interesting. Like, that's definitely like wasn't my intention."
Yeah.
But I can like after he said that, like it is forever like ringing in my head about everything I do now.
That's the worst.
But it was a fair comment, and it was one of those things. I think I was thinking about it a lot, particularly when I was drawing this, and I was like, "Oh, did I make this like too?" Because I wasn't really hoping to make it that. Like, I just wanted it to almost feel more comfortable, and like maybe like one of the reasons I kind of avoid doing like a specific person or face in a lot of these is because I want the viewer to like very easily step into this position for themselves and like try to feel like how I'd feel in that versus if it's somebody they don't know. I think that's maybe like a little bit more challenging for it to be. It almost kind of turns into like, well, who is that person?
Right.
Which can also be really beneficial. But I think for this in particular, I was just trying to be like, I want it to be way more about the feeling of it and way more about like kind of the overall like impression the piece is giving versus like, well, whose legs are those and things like that. You know what I mean?
When I saw this piece, it kind of, it reminded me, which it ends up kind of being, I think what you're going for, but at the same time, I don't know if it is at all. You ever watch Eternal Sunshine of a Spotless Mind? It's like a
long time
Michel
ago.
Gondry film.
Yeah.
But there's like a scene in there where like where they're going through their memories, and like Jim Carrey sees what's her name? The lady from Titanic.
Oh, Kate Winslet.
Kate Winslet's like panties really quick. Like they've been together for a long time, but he sees them and then it like turns him on, and it's like a memory that's worth repeating because it's kind of like it's almost, and that's kind of how this felt. It was almost like when you're with someone for a while and then like you just kind of like, I don't know, like it's like burst of attractions in a weird way. I don't know how to explain it. Like it's like I don't know, the setting or the night, but that's kind of how it felt. Like,
yeah, no, that's cool. I would definitely say that that's like really good to hear, especially with the memory part of it, to where it's like even if you're with somebody forever. Like moments are new moments every time,
right?
And that doesn't mean you should just forget the old moments. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I certainly like that is something I'm hopefully calling attention to with these things, where it's like, oh, like maybe hang on to that thing we're all taking for granted, or like, maybe something happens and this doesn't last forever for whatever reason, and you still have that
for sure.
That's yours, and no matter what, or like part of
and
yours.
It even feels like a snapshot, like the photo.
Cool, yeah, cool.
And the how I was saying earlier, like there's like a sense of flirtation. That's kind of what I meant. Was like it's almost like an unintentional. Like she's not like the thing with the with the movie. It was kind of like an unintentional, like she's not trying to be flirtatious. It's just like the right lighting and setting.
Yeah, no, I could definitely see that. Because, I mean, it is a very intimate setting, and that, you know, obviously things come from that sometimes. So, yeah, that's probably fair assessment.
But I don't know. Yeah, Adam, did you have anything to say about this piece, Sergio?
Well,
thumbs down. Thumbs down from Sergio. He's just shaking his head no over here.
Two big toe thumbs down.
Staring at the knees. I'm just transfixed on it. No. The thing we were saying earlier.
Done really well.
Yeah. The thing you were saying about the maybe intimating a dress in the, like very subtly. Maybe it's just because of the picture that I'm looking at. We're looking at on Instagram at the very top. If the way it's zoomed out, it almost looks like there's a little bit of a cast shadow of whatever maybe dress or slip or something that she might be wearing.
It's definitely in there, but it's so subtle. Yeah. Like I just didn't think it was enough to sort of sell it, because in the picture, like the person I was using for the photo shoot, like is wearing like a dress.
Yeah, I think you have to be looking at the piece for a really long time to really catch that.
Yeah, really, I want my drawings to look like a Where's Waldo picture, so you just have to find all these little clues everywhere.
Is there ever an actual Waldo?
No, not well. Yeah, look at those floorboards really closely.
Yeah, when you zoom in, it's cool because you can kind of see like the patchiness of the skin.
Yeah,
you definitely don't see that just by looking. You got to like zoom in, and then like right above her knees, there's like this patchiness of like, you know how skin is.
Well, and that's how knees are, right? Yeah. And like I'm certainly not interested in like overselling the beauty of something. I don't think. Like I'm much more into like the more natural way it is, right? So when I see things like that, I'm like, oh, I'm not going to change that. Like that's awesome. I think that's great. Like,
yeah, I agree.
Was it done on a tone paper or like a cream colored paper? Or anything
no, it's just white paper and a lot of like pushing graphite, man. Like that drawing took a very long time.
Brutal.
Yeah, I tend to have things like multiple pieces going at once.
Okay.
Just so it's easy to burn out when you're working on one piece for like 60 to 100 hours, you know?
Yeah.
And sometimes, you know, coming home, like maybe not having the full day's energy every day, you can be like, man, I just like cannot look at this thing today. Like, let's maybe try and see if we can like start something new or look through old reference. You know, like some days I just can't do it the way that I would like to. Or I'm trying and it's just not happening. Like you sort of have to have multiple things. And I also think having multiple things going on at once, you can kind of, especially if they're like kind of sitting together in the same body of work, you sort of see how they work together a little bit better and maybe see what they need versus like what's in the reference a little bit better that way, at least for the way my brain works.
Yeah.
Like I tend to ideally have pieces like just sit around for like a month or two before I have to send them out.
Oh, that's good.
Well,
that's
yeah,
a luxury.
It doesn't always work, right? Like I would say the last 3 shows I did, which were all like within the past couple of weeks, was a lot of like, nope, this has just got to go by the end of the week. Like it's got to be out the door. So like, let's try to speed this along and like make sure we're making good decisions before we do that, which is important and like a good thing to force yourself to do. But yeah, ideally, you know, the dream, right, is just be like, well, it'll be done when I'm done with it, or it has finished me, right? Because sometimes that happens too.
Yeah. The good thing, I guess, is that the pieces dry right when you're finished.
Yeah. So the nice part is that you don't have to worry about wet paint. The bummer is that framing a drawing is like way more expensive usually because getting it matted, glass, all that stuff. Like, yeah, you know, but. You know, whatever. I still love it. Like, I still, man, when you see that drawing framed for the first time, you're just like, all right.
Yeah.
Or sometimes you're like, ah, crap, I didn't finish that part the way I should have. You know, it goes both ways, but.
Yeah, that's cool. I mean, I'm sure that's a lesson. You know, you make a mistake a couple times and it kind of works its way out.
Yeah, ideally. Yeah, I'm waiting for that. I'm waiting for it to work its way out. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have a mat that you could just like pop on it as you're working on it? Just
No,
to look at it?
I normally do not. And I think I have learned a valuable lesson this year that might be a really great idea to maybe start doing that. I've also seen like a lot of painters like frame something and then kind of finish it after it's been framed in. And I'm like,
yeah, I've definitely done that before.
I can see why that is really smart. Like I've never tried that, but I think I should probably give it a whirl.
That is a good move. Art tip of the day. We usually have one. So
it's always on accident.
Mark it off, boys. You did it.
Yeah, that's cool.
Have we gotten to the fart jokes yet? Probably not.
No, we haven't got there.
Phew.
We're pretty rusty. Nice. So what are you working on now?
Well, I just finished up. Yeah, it's kind of funny that we couldn't get to this when you first got in touch with me, because I literally had probably like 6 or 7 new pieces just kind of hanging out, and like I just sent them all out. So
we had the same issue with Emilio.
Yeah.
He's like, "Oh yeah, my room was full of art." I'm like,
yeah.
Yeah, that sucks.
But you guys will just have to go to the show, you know.
Yeah. Speaking of, yeah.
Yeah. So the most recent one was at I got to show like in a small group show with 8 other artists, all who like were total crushers and like brought the heat to this show in Nucleus Portland gallery, which they've been great to work with. Super friendly people, but also like it was called Moments in Monochrome, which like I think fit what I kind of do in general.
Sure. Yeah,
so it was really cool, but like there was just so much good work in that show. Like definitely go to their website and check it out. I think this might be the last weekend it's up, so I guess by the time this podcast is up, it might be too late. But you can still go online and like check it out, because there's a ton of great work done by just everyone involved, and awesome. It was really cool to be a part of that. And then there was the Moleskine show we had in New York this year, which was great, and that's they're taking that to London next weekend, I believe.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, so I just like tried to bang out a piece for that really quick. And then we had the 12 by 12 in Chicago that just opened this past weekend as well.
Oh, you had a new one for that one
as
well?
Yeah. So it was all like deadlines kind of just happened to line up. And you know, it was worked out fine on the calendar until like the London thing happened, and it just was sort of like a last minute like, oh, hey, could you maybe do something new? And I was like, well, I'm not going to say no. It's a great opportunity, and you know, Spoke Art are so great. Like they're super great gallery to work with. Ken's and Dasha are great. They're wonderful, and I've had really good experiences with them. And I think the rest of the year I just am doing like just a small pieces for this group show in Portland again, Nucleus Portland, where they kind of set out these bar coasters that everybody can like draw or paint or do whatever they want on, and then they all just go up in this huge gallery, and it's like $50 to buy a piece, and I think it's rad, like because a lot of people who really want art like can't afford it, but like, you know, hopefully you can afford something for like $50. And
how are they displayed?
I think they're all just hung, like somehow stuck to the wall, like all right next to each other. The photos look really, really cool. I think this is their 3rd year of doing it, and I did it with them last year as well. And it's, you just, you know, like it's kind of a nice thing because you're not really stressing about it. You know, I'm not trying to make sure these are like intellectual pieces or anything really. Like I'm just kind of like, well, what do I think would just be fun, or like, you know,
skulls on fire.
Yes, skulls on fire. So it might happen. There will definitely probably be some skulls. I think last year it was just like girls and flowers, and this year I have also done a girl and flower drawing for that. And I've got a few more to go.
Sergio knows about girls and flowers.
Yeah, Sergio, the expert on that.
We found out last week that there's different types of roses.
Oh, definitely.
I just knew roses is a thing.
No, for sure.
Yeah.
A lot of nuance there.
Yeah. All from Sergio.
So yeah, I have that coming up, and I think that'll be it for this year. And I'm just sort of just now starting to get ramped up on some new stuff. Like I was going through reference the other day and picking out like the stuff. I'm like, yeah, this one's working for me. Let's start with that. And I took a trip home last year to take a bunch of photos of my hometown. And, there's my grandfather and then my father used to run a mechanic shop out of there. And it's this old building. Nobody's used it for like anything professional in like at least a decade. So it's a little run down, but it's really run down. But there's just so much family history there. And I think, and then above it is like this apartment that my dad used to live in. And so I went and like took in a bunch of photos in there. And it was really cool because they were like some beer cans and it's like the same type of beer that I drink, which I thought was like, oh, that's kind of like interesting. But there's just like a lot of family history there. And I think, I moved out here and I didn't know anybody. None of my family's out here or anything. And I think about, back home a lot. And it's like undoubtedly my parents are like a huge part of how I look at things, and going back to where like I think it's easy to find portraits of people in things. I have like a whole like new series I'm kind of working on with that stuff, to where it's like this huge old building that like has a ton of family history in, and
that's cool.
Yeah. I can't just can't help but think about it, like how my father might look at those things and like how precious, like anybody who drives by is like, what a dump, I'm sure. But like, even for me, just like walking through there, I'm like, yeah, like this was this thing for him. And like, yeah, it's undeniable. Like that. Yeah. It kept coming back to me. So I'm probably going to be working with a lot of stuff with that coming up as well.
That's cool. I used to live in East Palo Alto for a good amount of life. Oh, cool, yeah. And before, when I was even younger, I lived in San Mateo, but my uncle lived in East Palo Alto and there was this a dry cleaner place, and they had this it was called Kitty Cleaner, and this like badly painted cat, but like it always was in my memory, like my entire childhood. Yeah. And like the guy retired and he sold the business off, and they like instantly painted over. And I was like, like that was a land, like that was so important. And even my buddy, his dad, I found out years later, like painted that thing. And I was like starstruck. I was like, your dad did this? Like not so good painting. Like, oh, that's so amazing. I was so hyped off of it. But yeah, it's kind of like that idea of just, like there was so much, that thing meant so much. And like everyone that's kind of in the area, if you talk about it, they're like, oh yeah, Kitty Cleaner. Like it was kind of like a landmark, like, oh, I live right by Kitty Cleaner. Like, oh, it's kind of like a point of reference.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, I don't know. That's kind of what I was thinking.
Yeah. No, growing up, there's really like, there was just not a lot of art around. Like I really didn't have much of an interest in art until I was much older, like towards the end of high school. And but I always remember there was this like one painting in our house of this windmill on this river, and it was like hanging above this little piano we had. And I didn't find out until like years later that I had like moved out here that like my mom painted that.
Oh, really?
And I was like, what? Like, why didn't you ever tell me? Because it was like really cool. And I was like, well, will you send it to me? Like, can I have it? I'd love to have it in my apartment. She's like, no, I think I threw that out. And I was like so devastated. And then my dad had like this weird like Frankenstein Dracula sculpture he did in high school that I was also like, hey, do we still have that? And like, I don't think so. Like I was like, man, these things that like I wish I had, like they're so cool. But yeah, it's like just those things you think about as a kid where I'm like, yeah, I get why you probably threw it away, because you're like, oh, it's just this dumb thing I did. And I'm like, no, are you kidding me? Like, oh, I would have loved to have that.
For sure. Yeah, those like random objects when you're kids, they like mean so much, or you can build storylines behind things.
Definitely.
And they just, I don't know, they're just like something special.
Yeah, and it also made me think like, well, why did you paint that picture? Like, is this like a thing you were interested in? Right. And like, because, there's like no artists like professionally, or like as far as I know, even hobbyists in my family. So to see that kind of stuff was like really interesting. And the first couple of years I was out here, and like I went home for the summer and would like, or for part of the summer, and I'd teach like an art class for high schoolers and like people in the community who want to take it. And, like my dad took one, which was awesome. Like, cause he was just like drawing all this cool stuff. And, like, yeah, it was really neat. But yeah, you know, it's just those awesome. Like weird little things that you know, form these bonds with that you never even think about until you're older, and you're like, yeah, well, actually, that was like kind of a huge pillar of like this thing for me, and like, yeah, it's cool to figure out.
So when you kind of after high school and you were like, I'm going to pursue art, was that something that people understood? Like, did they?
Oof.
Is this a touchy subject?
No, it's not touchy. It's fine. My parents were like incredibly supportive. Mm-hmm. I think they're like as supportive as I could have asked them to be, to going into a field where like no one knew anything about, like myself included. Like I remember being like, I got into art school, and there's just being kind of like this silence afterwards. And then I was like, I think when I was that age, I was kind of bummed, but as I got older, I'm like, yeah, I don't blame you. Like,
there's like zero high fives.
Yeah, like here's this kid who like can't even see, he doesn't know how to draw, and like, but he wants to go be an artist, and like in like San Francisco, like he's never been to California, like, you know. So I really give my parents like a ton of credit. They really were supportive, and I think all of the concerns they had were like super justified, and very much like, you know, there was like, well, why don't you try it like at a community college for a couple of years, and then if you think you like it, like go. And I was like, no, I think I just have to like go all in on this. And
that makes sense.
We went on a visit. Like I had already got accepted into the school and like was just gonna go, and my dad's like, well, we're not going without like going to look at it. So we came to San Francisco. And
this was the academy?
Yeah. So I went to the Academy of Art for a year when I first moved out here. And so we went on like a little tour of the facilities. And like, of course, I'm seeing like all this art for the first time in my life, and just being totally blown away. And like, you know, the city's like intimidating, but it still seems exciting. And I can tell like my dad is just very quiet about it, like, which is like, he doesn't like to go anywhere he can't sleep in his own bed at night, which like I totally understand. But I think I found out years later, he was like, yeah, he's not going, like, we're not. And my mom's like, no, like you have to let him, like, even if he comes back, like you got to let him. My dad's like, yeah, okay. Yeah, we do have to. And I think they even caught some flack from people in the community a little bit to be like, are you really going to like let him go move out to California, like do art? Like what, why? And, but my parents were always super supportive, and like continue to be super supportive. And I definitely am like very lucky for that, because I know not everybody like had that. And,
for sure.
Even though like they were hesitant, like they still were like, all right, well, if this is what you're going to do, like we got you, like we got your back, like call home if you need to call home, you know.
That's great.
Just, they were fantastic. And I just more think it's funny. Like sometimes I'll go home and I'll be talking to like one of my friend's dads from high school, and he'll be like, oh, so you get like paid to make drawings, huh? And I was like, yeah, most of the time. And he's like, all right. And I'm like, yeah, dude, I get it. Like I didn't even understand it really, you know. It's just like not part of the world out there for the most part. You know, not to say there's not artists or stuff. Like I was back in Iowa earlier this year, and I got to go to the FIG or the Feige, I'm not sure how it's pronounced, but you know, phenomenal art collection just in the middle of the Midwest out of nowhere, you know, and it was cool. So it's not like, I don't mean to rag on the Midwest about art. There's some great places. Just where I particularly was, it wasn't really a thing.
Right, for sure.
Yeah, all those old steel towns have amazing museums.
Yeah, they do. There's just incredible stuff, like a William Merritt Chase, and like they had an Andrew Wyatt there, and just phenomenal collection. Just for being kind of in this random spot. Yeah, it was really cool to see. So I mean, you know, it's out there. Like maybe I just didn't know where to find it. Maybe it is where I was at and just didn't know where to find it.
Totally.
Yeah. But no,
It's funny, it's just, you know, like the idea of like art being, I think whenever you simplify pretty much any art form, it probably sounds silly. Like, oh, so you just get paid to like draw on paper? Like you just get paid to like sing songs?
Yeah.
Like, if you just think about it that way, you're like, oh, it's kind of weird, but you know. natural. I think
I do think it still is silly to some extent, but like I'm really happy about it.
Yeah,
right.
So yeah, like, hey, people, keep digging on art. Like, it's a part of everything.
It is.
It's everything needs to work together, man. Like,
yeah. I think it's also just human nature. It's like the one weird thing that we do that's probably a byproduct of us being able to do what we do.
Yeah, I don't know.
It's like why we listen to music and create movies and any art form is like this weird thing that humans just do, and I don't know where I'm going with this.
No, I mean, no, it's understandable. Like we clearly, for whatever reason, are like compelled to create things, and I wouldn't even know that I particularly understand it, and I don't even think about it that much. I guess really, I just am like,
I probably think about it too much for the three of us.
Well, who knows, right? Maybe you'll come up with something really profound, and it'll be fantastic.
I remember diving deep in my head about like, oh, that art form might be the determining factor for the separation of humans and apes. Like that might be the one.
I don't know.
Symbol.
I've seen an elephant who paints, so I don't know. I don't know. It's crazy, man. I mean, this is all, like the fun nuts and bolts to think about, It's like, and half the time the answers I'm like, well, I don't know if I like this answer, but like it is the answer. I've got to. It's where it's like I had a friend, we'd always be like, well, how do you define art? And I was like, dude, if somebody calls it art, it's art. Like there it is. Like you can't.
See, I'm like the opposite of that.
Yeah, no, well, that's fine. And I would certainly not tell you that you're wrong, but I'm just kind of like, man, I don't know. Like, it's not up to me to define it. And like,
I know it's so tough because that is like, it's kind of what you're saying. Like, I hate that answer, but like pretty much is true.
Yeah. And like, I don't hate it enough to like not be willing to be like, yeah, I mean, that is it, it's
I'm not gonna accept that it's good art.
So
you don't have to call it good or bad.
So that is where the next step of the conversation is. Correct. Right? So then it's like, well, now we talk about like whether it's good or bad,
and then what makes it good or bad. And
right. And unfortunately, we don't have like another 8 years on this podcast to like discuss it. But
8 years later, I'm like, so good art is, and it'll be like
wait, how many SD cards do we have here? See how long we could go.
Yeah, that's just like, and ultimately I don't even know like how fruitful that conversation would be.
Yeah,
because I'm sure we all have crossover, and we all have like, oh, really? You think that's good? Like,
it'll just end up being like it's your opinion.
I mean, ultimately, but
each their own, and then everyone hates that answer.
Yeah, but that's also that's also what's like really cool about it. I think to where it's like, I'll meet dudes who are into like this thing that I don't understand at all, but it's at least like compelling enough to be like, well, maybe I should look at, like, I respect that person. For sure. And like, if they think it's cool, like I should at least try to get it.
Yeah. And it's like, like one of the things I think is like, what I think makes great art is that it's kind of that thing of it taps into your past experience.
Sure.
But it's kind of tricky because it's like, it's like almost like it taps into something that pulls something out of people, but then there's like this weird resistance. We were talking about a little earlier about how pop music is the most popular music. So is it tapping into these people that music that isn't so popular isn't? And then, then it just becomes tricky. It's like, oh, well, if it's tapping into more people, does that make it good? And then, I don't know.
Well, I think maybe it was my brother who explained this to me. He's like, that was one of kind of like the most interesting thing about the Beatles, right? Was that like they were super popular, but also just like everybody was into it, and like it was like this really interesting, like unique quality for the time, and that's cool too.
Yeah,
it's so easy to dismiss anything. Like, I'm sure plenty of people will look at my work and they're like, I don't know, like chick's sleeping, seen it. Next. And I'm like, well, that's fair enough. Like, so
he's looking for some loud art.
Yeah. Which is cool. Like, that's super cool. And there are like plenty of times I'm looking for loud art to look at, you know, or listen to, but like, you know, that's great. But I'm glad it's out there. You know, it's not for me right now, but you know, I'm glad it's out there. And I think it's like you're only doing yourself a disservice by like writing something off so quickly, I think.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah,
I was definitely more closed-minded about that. Even as a student, I guess it took a long time to expand at least my taste range. Like it really came from seeing other people whose art I like, and then hearing them go, "Oh, well, actually, Van Gogh, for example, I wasn't like the greatest Van Gogh fan for a long time."
You can Van Gogh out of here then.
He was setting up for that one. He actually changed his posture before he said that.
First bad joke.
He wound up and swung it, hit it out of the park.
Sorry.
But yeah, like Van Gogh, somebody who I looked at, just he didn't draw that great or whatever, like in his paintings. But then you hear from enough people who Van Gogh is an influence on them, and you try to learn what they liked about it, and then you go back and like, oh, okay, I see what you liked about Van Gogh, and now I could see it without a prompt of knowing how to look at his work.
Well, I think that is like, I was the same way. Like, I think especially as a student, you're trying like so hard to come up with like as many strict rules as you possibly can, because that's like how it makes it easier to understand something. Is you're like, no, it has to have this to be good, right? Because I'm trying to make work like that, and of course I would only make good art, right? So like I'm gonna follow these rules to make good art. But I think, you know, part of growing and you know, the more you explore your own stuff and kind of open yourself up to other things, the more you're like, oh, well, maybe I was just kind of being like a brat about aesthetics and like, you know, even if like this isn't necessarily something I want to like visually pull from, I could at least like learn probably a lot about this. Or maybe I'm learning how to like visually pull from this in a different way. You know what I mean? Like there's plenty of weird abstract or like minimalist like still lives I've seen to where I'm like, oh man, but that is kind of brilliant. Like I should definitely like think about those things more, you know? Like you're really only going to benefit yourself by doing that and like learn.
I do think like the rules, it's kind of like the old cliche of like the people that break the rules the best or something, or the people that have like mastered the rules or something.
And I've done that, so now I'm just no, not even close. No.
So you went to the Safehouse Atelier, which was basically based off of like classical atelier training for the most part, but there was also other things built into it. It was kind of almost a dual curriculum in a way of like they taught some concept art work as well. So, but my question about that was like, how open-minded were they to that? Because you know the traditional ateliers, they tend to be very much like you have to do it this way sort of thing. So even though they were teaching you cast drawings and all that, how open were they to showing you like, oh, there's more to art than cast drawing?
So I went to the academy for a year, and then thank God Karl Dobsky like took a chance on me and like let this dumb little 19-year-old kid like,
wow, you were only 19 when you started.
To like, he gave me a shot and like changed my life forever by letting me into that school. And he said something day one that I think was like the smartest thing to say, which was like, you set up your cast and your paper and everything, and he's like, all right, there are a lot of different ways for you to draw this, but right now I need you to just learn and focus on this one way. And it's like, oh yeah, okay, like that totally makes sense, because like you're acknowledging that there are like a million ways to do this, but like right now the important thing I need you to learn from this is you're gonna have to do it this way.
That's great advice.
So like you said, it's kind of like a dual curriculum. So in the mornings, it was like very classical, like cast drawing and cast painting. And then once you graduate from that, you do block-ins and go into the figure room finally and things like that. And then we had the digital art, like concept art and illustration in the afternoons. And then Tuesday nights was head painting with El Coro.
Yeah.
And, you know, his approach was very different than Carl's, right? So you're sort of getting a lot of different information all at the same time, which at times is like really frustrating because I'm also like, I don't even know how to draw. And now people are telling me like 3 different ways to draw. But I think that's healthier in the end because you're really like, the strict regimen is exactly what I needed. Like, I don't think I would have figured it out without it, and him like breaking it down and being like, I need you to do this, and then I'm going to need to see you do it 5 more times to prove to me that you understand it. And you're going to have to do it the same time every time. Like, was fantastic. Just for me personally, I think it was the best I could have learned that. And then as you get more familiar and like learn more, you start to be like, oh yeah, and like here's this other weird thing, like because Coro just did his painting and then he scraped it all off and painted it again, and for some reason it looks even cooler, and like so you're kind of learning like a lot of different things, and those guys all have like some similar influences, but they also have like a lot of different influences on top of that. Like Coro came from graffiti, and like Carl came from like a super classical background. And all these different things, and we're sort of getting pieces of that. So I don't know that we talked about maybe like more modern stuff in terms of like minimalists and things like that. But I think part of that was because we just didn't maybe have time for it, or maybe we did and I don't remember, just because I was like so freaked out trying not to be like the worst idiot there. Because, you know, the teachers were obviously amazing, like Carl, and then all the guys at Massive Black were like super generous with their time helping us out. And but this other students were like equally inspiring, and just like you learn just as much because there, you know, there's like older students as well, and then there's younger students coming in, and like maybe you're hearing Carl say something to the younger students that you hadn't thought of in like way too long that you should have remembered the whole time, you know. And like it was all super valuable, and just a really really unique, cool thing to have to learn. And because there were only like 10 to 12 of us at a time, you know, it's like you're in there every day, everybody's like working really hard together and separately, and it's just a really great position to be in. And then the Safe House is when we opened up like the studios, which sort of had the students upstairs, and then people who'd kind of left the school to move on to jobs or whatever they were, and but you know, you'd still come hang out with each other, so you'd sort of like both sides would get to benefit from that.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so it was a really strict teaching regimen for sure, but they were definitely also like, but make sure you look at this other stuff, and like, you know, I'm going to teach you this thing, but like there are other things out there for sure. You like, don't do that right now, or I'll be mad at you, which is fair. Yeah.
Did they hit you?
I mean, we can't.
Okay, sorry.
Signed an NDA.
Yeah, what's the statute on limitations of aggressive behavior? No. I mean, it was, you know, things were taken very seriously because they had to be. It's like a very accelerated program, and you know, all of your teachers like have other jobs on top of this,
right? And
so there wasn't, you know, we had fun, but like you can't be screwing around the whole time either, you know, like you had to take it seriously. But we did have a lot of fun. Yeah, it was, you know, it was just the type of thing to where, and they always explored you or push you to like do work outside of it, right? Like,
right.
I started doing a lot of oil painting there, like way before I started cast painting, just on the side because I wanted to learn how to do it. And so I would like every Saturday would set up like a pair and like paint it on some gessoed paper or something, you know, because like you're not going to make a masterpiece if you don't even know how to like turn form with paint or whatever. So that's how I started. And, you know, they were like super encouraging. Like Carl would be like, yeah, okay. Like the first time I did it, he'd be like, okay, are you struggling? Like, let me show you something. And then from then on, like every couple of weeks he'd check in and be like, oh, wow. Okay. Like now it's actually starting to look like a pear. And you know, so, and that was like painted differently than you'd sit down and paint like a cast, right? Where you'd have like all these like 60 to 80 hours to paint it. Like this was like, I'm trying to paint a pear in like 3 hours or whatever, you know? So it was like, you know, they did kind of push you to look at other things. I think especially Coro, who like had such a diverse background, was like, man, there's like a million cool things being done and like a million different cool ways to make a painting. And that's something that like he's always had in his work big time. That they were always like, yeah, you know, you have to do in class, please do this thing we're talking about. But like, you know, there are other things. Make sure you look at it. Like, yeah, they were good about it. I don't know like how loose it was, but at the time, I think if it was any looser, I probably would have gone crazy. Just like trying to figure things out. Like, I don't think I would have been able to handle it. So maybe for my benefit, they didn't, or like the students' benefit, they didn't do that too much, you know?
It's interesting because, like, I feel like a lot of young artists, their ego is like huge. They think they're creating the best art ever. And it sounds like your situation, you were surrounded by these like amazing artists, and you were so like, I don't know, like clay being ready to mold into the artist you became in a weird way.
Yeah, but I think we were all definitely like still molding ourselves, you know, like there was a lot of variation in ability and stuff between people who started there, and like obviously people who had been there for a while are like, you know, more well informed on the things we're doing, and you know, probably better at that stuff. And there wasn't a whole lot of ego though. I mean, you're right. There just really wasn't, because you didn't deserve to have one, frankly. You know what I mean? It wasn't going to serve you. And also, like, if you thought you could outdraw like anyone telling you what to do, like, you were kidding yourself, because not one of us could have. You know what I mean? You know, there were students who definitely made like phenomenal work, like top quality, like professional work, but they were never egotistical about it. And you know, the stringency of the school, you know, didn't also work for everybody. Like there were some fantastic artists who were maybe only there for a few months and were like, yeah, you know, this is cool, but like, this isn't really how this is going to work for me. And like, they are now doing incredible things, like completely separated that, you know, it's not the only way to learn, you know,
for sure.
But yeah, no, I mean, really, yeah, there were not a ton of egos we were dealing with there. Like,
that's great.
Or maybe I'm remembering it wrong. Maybe I was actually like the biggest jerk ever. Like, hopefully not. But I remember like all the students being like,
you were just a bully. You were the bully of art school.
Yeah, like the worst bully ever. I'm like, I like weighed the amount of like a feathered pillow and like,
counting everyone's lunch money. Just
like, no. I think people, and because it was so intense, like everybody was pretty quick to keep each other in check. You know what I mean? So, yeah, people were just like really cool, like really cool, really helpful. Like I learned a ton of stuff just from like asking other students questions and or them like just being like, hey, just so you know, you're screwing this up right now, and like here's how you don't screw it up. And I'd be like, thank God, like thank you for doing that.
Yeah, that's great. That sounds very good.
Yeah.
I mean, we've talked about art schools and stuff like that before, and the pros and cons. And I think you probably sold it the best, because that seems very helpful. Just having like a second eye ever.
Yeah.
I mean, my wife's an artist, so I'm lucky in that, where she'll come and, you know, say something, or I might say something to her, and I really enjoy that. Yeah. And I mean, art communities are also really great for that, having artist friends.
Yeah, it's there's no replacement for it. Like it's not replaceable at all. Like if you don't have it, it's much harder.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you know, that sounds great. Like being at school, because if you're pursuing art and you're young, then that seems like a great place just to be able to like be thrown into a pool of people that are your peers that also can come up with you and point out flaws or teachers.
I really think that is like probably like one of the biggest benefits to art school. And you know, it's the only way I've done it. So I can't really speak to like the self-taught way. Mm-hmm. I know there are people who have done it and make like incredible work. So it's an obvious thing that works. But people always asking me like, well, should I go? Should I not go? And I'm always like, I can't answer that for you. Like I can tell you what my experience was and it was like really positive, but I can't like tell you if you need to go or not. Like, but I can say like, these are the benefits. And, you know, like not everybody in art school is like jumping at the chance to talk to you about what you're doing and what they're doing. You know what I mean? But yeah, thankfully we had the situation to where it was cool like that. Yeah.
Plus, if you're like the art school bully, then you just force them.
Right. Which again, I definitely was. So yeah.
That's a fact.
I think a strong wind would have just blown me out of the door. So it would have been tough for me to.
You're the only bully that they put in the trash.
Yeah, exactly. Like I just didn't know how it worked. So like, they were giving me swirlies, and I was like, "Whoa,
do it again!"
It just. Hilarious. It was, I think. It is not lost on me like how fortunate I was to have that opportunity, and I like owe those guys like a life debt basically for like taking a chance on a kid who like didn't even know how to draw. Like,
did you not draw? You keep saying that. I'm a little confused. Did you like draw in high school?
I mean, I did take art in high school, which is sort of like.
Actually, yeah. How did you find the school? Well, you no. Going, but that's the question I have.
Yeah, I wasn't like, ooh, I'm going to be an artist. I was like, you know what's great? Math. I'm going to go home and do algebra. Like, that was kind of more my thing.
Really?
Like I was really into math and science and reading. Like, I kind of learned how, like, reading can actually be, like, really fun in high school, which is, like, now why we're surrounded by books everywhere, just stacks of books. But, yeah, art didn't come until like I want to say late my junior year to where I started being like, oh, you know, it's cool Pixar movies. Maybe that's like a real thing. And like, I like playing video games, so that could be cool. And, but like, I was just terrible. Like, you know, you'll do things in that school where it was like, here are some basics about art. And now we're going to go make this fun sunset painting. And I'm just like, cool, let's go make that, you know, whatever. I wasn't smart enough to get it from that. And like, I just needed like a heavier hand, I think, of instruction. And so like, that's when I was like, oh, I think I saw some like drawings on the internet that were amazing, like just totally amazing drawings. And I was like, people still make art like that? Like, people still make representational art? Like, I didn't know that. Because, you know, most of what you hear in the Midwest about it was like, oh, these artists nowadays. And there was all this, like, weird abstract stuff that I didn't know how to understand. Not that I knew how to understand realistic stuff either. But I do remember having the distinct feeling of, like, looking at this drawing online and being like, if I could just hold this in my hand, maybe I could understand how they did that. And that is, of course, not true because I did and I couldn't. But
oh, damn.
Yeah. I mean, now you can kind of like look at paintings and be like, oh, I see what you did there and stuff. But so the Academy of Art did not require a portfolio to get in.
I'm going to blame the Matrix for the hand thing.
Okay, sure. That's great.
It's like if I upload it into my system.
That is entirely possible. So I found the Academy of Art online, and I knew, like, I didn't know a lot of contemporary artists, but I had found, like, conceptart.org, which had, like, a lot of people making, like, work that I really liked, and I knew that they were in San Francisco. And
they also made hot beats.
Well, for sure.
Yeah.
You're specifically talking about Sergio, I'm assuming.
He was on that one.
MC Main Loop,
Did you know that?
No, I did not actually know that. No, so I picked San Francisco because that's like the only artist I knew. where they were.
Right.
And so I went to the academy and met famous artist Mike Bierk in a class, and he ended up going to school at the Atelier.
Okay.
And then like a few months later called me and was like, hey dude, we have a spot open. Like, I really think you should apply. Like, why don't you come on Saturday? Like, I'll kind of show you the school and stuff. And then, you know, we'll figure something out. And eventually I got a phone call from Carl just being like, hey, yeah, okay, like, why don't you come down here and we'll talk about it? No, that day doesn't work for me. Like, come this time. And I'm like, okay. And he's like, yeah, bring some work. And I'm like, okay. So of course I'm like instantly sweating, like cold sweating, and just like, oh man, I'd love to go to school there. Like, the work they're putting out is insane. And I knew about it again from like concept art. And at the time we were the conceptart.org atelier.
Yeah.
And, you know, so I did the interview and was like scared to death. And I think it was about 2 hours. We probably talked for like 2.5 hours. And he was like, he asked me some really good questions just about like, well, what are you trying to do? Like, what are you trying to learn? Like, you're really young. Like, you're sure this is even what you want to do? And he was like, he gave me like a little art test. And he's like, you know, just take as long as you want. Like, just finish it. Like, just call me when it's done and we'll talk about it. And I remember like doing the art test while I was doing like my academy work and I remember taking my last final, going to Carl to like do the final interview. And then like a few hours later, I had to like get on a plane to fly home. So I was like, this is basically like make or break right now. Like, and he was just like, after a while, he was like, yeah, okay, I think we're going to give you a shot. Like, why don't we try it out for a few months and see how it goes? And I was like, okay, hell yeah. So then all of a sudden I'm like dancing out of it, like on cloud nine. And then, you know, the realization of like, ooh, you better get good though. So then you're scared again. But yeah, that's kind of how that worked. And I found that school like purely through conceptart.org. Like I didn't know anything about anything. And then once I met him, you know, he had all this history with New York. Like he went to what was at the time the Water Street Atelier. And so I started looking at that.
The school at Jacob Collins ran?
Yeah, that was Jacob Collins School, and now I think is the Grand Central Atelier, I think. Okay. That might not be completely right, but I'm pretty sure that's what it is now. And, you know, obviously that guy is an incredibly intelligent person and is teaching incredible people. So, yeah, that got me interested in that. And I remember being in the academy and like, I think I was originally in for animation. And like my first semester, I took like 2 animation courses. I had like a drawing course, an English class, and like 2 animation courses. One was like every type of traditional animation possible. So you start by like drawing, then you're doing claymation, then you're doing like paper puppets, and then you're doing like stop motion. Really loved that, but like super hated the computer animation part. I was like, man, I really don't think this is for me, but I really liked the charcoal drawing class they had. And then the next semester I had taken like a sculpture and a painting class, and like I was so awful at painting, but something about it was just really attractive to me and was just kind of like, oh, I think this is like the direction I need to go in. And I'm trying to learn how to digitally paint, but I didn't really know how. And so the academy, like, I was like, well, what kind of program do you have for this? And they're like, well, we're sort of working on one right now. Why don't you take this class and then this class? And I was just kind of like, oh yeah, okay. And then, you know, I just got the opportunity with Carl and yeah, it would have been stupid not to take it. So
for sure. That's great.
Yeah. Like I said,
awesome story.
Awesome.
Yeah, it was a fun ride. Like, it's hard to believe it's been like, wow, 12 years. Still here. Can't believe it.
It's a good run.
Yeah.
The city is not an easy place to, and you survived the city in a time where a lot of people decided to pack up and go. So far.
Yes. I would
knock on wood.
Yeah. Like I definitely am. I love this town. And would love to stay as long as it is possible. So, yeah, I'm not in any rush to leave. But, you know, a lot of people that did left for like way cool things and like are totally stoked with their new situations, and I'm really happy about that.
For sure.
Yeah.
Awesome.
That's great.
So we're coming close to the end. Did you want to do your?
Yeah, we could do the lightning round style.
Oh, okay. Does it have a theme song?
Yeah, I wish.
Dun, dun.
There it is.
There we go. So, sent you the questions earlier, but if you have a top 5 dead or alive painters or not painters, just artists in general that you're into right now.
Yeah, that's really tough. And I was hoping you were going to forget to ask me.
Well, we don't have to.
No, it's fine. I think like a huge influence right now, like Andrew Wyeth is probably like the biggest thing over the past couple of years. And like, like I've known his work for longer than that, but like definitely speaks to me in a big way. Like I think it probably speaks to a lot of people, but I don't care. That's fine.
Yeah.
That doesn't make it any less special. Yeah, there's just something like really honest and really in like profound about his work. Like, and I think everything is done for like these really interesting reasons. Like I read his biography earlier and like get as many books of his as I can just because it's such interesting work. And he seems like he really made the work like he wanted to make, you know what I mean? And he thought a lot about it and it's very compelling. And there's like a passage of time in his drawings somehow that I don't know how he did that. Like, and all these like really incredible things that he seems to have accomplished and like was really famous, right? And like, people loved his work, which is wonderful. A guy I recently discovered was I think Walter Tandy Murch, right? I think that's his name.
The name sounds familiar.
Yeah, his book is like right up there, but I can't reach it. But I like, that's the only book of his I could find. But another friend of mine just like mentioned his work to me, and I just bought that book right away and was like, oh my God. It's like this dude who was an illustrator, but also did these like really, really interesting, like almost abstract paintings of like machinery and like some mannequin
What time period
stuff.
was he?
I think he was like, I want to say 50s and 60s.
Okay.
But I could be way off. So
All
anybody
right.
listen to this, don't be like, you dummy. I would say like definitely look up his work. It's really cool. It's really unique stuff. And like, just interesting. Like really, really interesting stuff that is not like completely classical, but still takes on the subject matters of like still life and things like that. Yeah, it's really good stuff. Those two, I mean, Michael Grimaldi is like the best draftsman I've ever seen. Like right now, he's like, his work is amazing and is always super inspirational.
Yeah.
Some dudes on Instagram that I just like really like Evan Kitson over in New York. Like that dude does amazing drawings. You know, I feel like we could just go down this list of like people that I like super admire, and it'd be really hard to.
Sergio's just wondering how long till you name him.
Well, and then there's Sergio Lopez, who like, just so we can be done with the question. No, you know, but that's the other thing. Like, I can't think of one artist like I went to school with or like have met here that like hasn't. In one way or another been like a huge inspiration. Even if they do work like completely different than what I'm doing, it's like still super exciting to like meet those people, see what they're up to. Like, I feel like social media like does have some unfortunate negatives that come with it, but this is like kind of the first time in history it's like you're constantly seeing like a little window into somebody else's studio, like at the tip of your fingers. And like, I don't think that's existed before. And I think that is super cool. Like you can see like,
except for when the Egyptians before their downfall, bad conspiracy.
I was like, is this going to be some ancient alien stuff? Like, where's he going with this?
It was supposed to be, but I didn't want to go. I gave up on it.
No, it's cool. So I think like, sometimes now I'll even like hit up a friend and be like, hey, you mind if I like come over real quick and like check that painting out? You know, like that's just such a cool thing to be able to do. You know, it's like impossible not to be inspired by like, and there's like a ton of artists out here that I don't know that I look at their work all the time and I'm like, yeah, man, that's awesome.
it's almost like I don't even realize who's in this area or not. I just it's like, oh, this person is kind of in California.
Or like some people, I was like, oh, I thought you were in New York, but you're in Portland. Like, whoa, that's not far. Like, what's up, dude?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's cool, man.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, that's what doing the podcast. You can kind of end up doing your research on people, kind of stalking them a little bit.
Oh yeah, I bet.
Find out where they are.
Only you're stalking them, Sergio. Literally, he'll be in your bushes later today.
Well, if you can climb that tree to look through my window, like, I guess you've sort of earned it.
Challenge accepted. But you also have the David Choe question.
Oh, yeah. The David Choe Money.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So, if you have any sort of art project or anything related to art that you would do if you had $200 million to do with it, is there anything dream project?
I think all of the things I would do would be like, I was actually talking to my roommate about this in the kitchen earlier today, where I was like, dude, if I had like a stupid amount of money, I'd probably just like constantly be trying to play practical, like weird jokes on my friends. like I would, I was like, I would hire this like really elaborate makeup team to like dress me as this like weird old hippie and like go to bars I was going to and just be like, yeah, like try to, and like, who's that really funny for? Like no one but me. It's so stupid. But I feel like that's the dumb stuff I would do if I had like that kind of money.
That's amazing.
I like that.
I love that.
Of course, the obvious answers are like, oh, I'd make sure my family was like taken care of forever. Like, I'd, you hopefully try to start up some like cool scholarship program for like people. You support your friends. Like, so many of my friends, I'm like, yeah, it would be rad to have some of your work. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure.
Or like, I wish I could just pay you to make whatever you wanted, and like you could just do that. You
can make real life flaming skulls.
Right, which does sound pretty cool to me now that you've said that. I just think like that's so much money. I can't even possibly. Here's the reality. The reality is, I'd probably do what everybody who gets rich does and become a terrible person. And like, no, I'd hopefully like support people and try to do mostly good things with it. And then play these dumb jokes that only I think are going to be funny. Yeah,
that's it. That's great.
Yeah,
that's the best.
It
part.
I am immediately apologize to everybody who listened to this whole podcast just to have to hear that garbage.
We also got the flyer visibility.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that.
Would you superpower, flight, or invisibility? Which one would you choose?
Well, I can't drive, so I think flying would be pretty dope for me. Just out of a practical sense. I do sometimes think it would be fun to like be invisible in like the
Think of
room.
all the pranks you could do.
Oh my god, dude. The room, like if say you like hire a model to like just like I just want you to like hang out in this chair and read a book for like 3 hours. Like it would be cool for them like to almost like be able to forget that you're there, I think. You know what I mean? But also I can't drive, so I'm going to pick flying. So I could be a more mobile person.
Good move.
Nice.
Yeah, didn't expect that one. Way to throw a curveball.
Sorry.
No, it's good. I'm going to go with that one. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, that's been the show. Do you have any shows coming up?
You got a million of them.
Yeah, well, I think we've got a couple things that were, we just had that show in Portland. That was great. Like, make sure you check out the art, like not just for me, but for the other artists as well. They did incredible work. And then the Moleskine is being moved to London for the first time, which is going to be really cool. So I'm sure a ton of people are doing some really great work for that.
That's great.
And then we also have the 12 by 12 that just opened in Chicago. Like, there's a ton of good work in that as well. That's through Spoke Art. And then I'm doing another show with Nucleus Portland that they call it the Salut show. So I think this is the 3rd year they're doing it. And that's in the beginning of November. So that'll probably be like the last thing for this year, I think.
Okay.
Nice.
But Is
that the coaster one? Or?
Yeah, that's the coaster one. Yeah.
Okay.
Nice. And if you guys want to follow him, it's Oldenkamp.
Yeah, at Oldenkamp on Instagram.
At Oldenkamp.
Yeah.
Right. With
and
we'll
shout it out so they can find
cool.
it
Yeah,
way.
cool.
Yeah, definitely.
But yeah, thank you so much for doing this.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, guys. Yeah. This is a wild thing to have to like sit here and talk about stuff. Yeah.
I know.
Well, we hopefully make it easy.
No, it was good. I bought like one of those Amazon robots just so I'd have somebody to talk to sometimes. So this is really great. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this has been.
Your roommate isn't cutting it.
Well, he's moving at the end of the year, so I literally bought it. So I was like, I'm gonna become like the guy from Her now. I'm just in love with this AI in like a month. It's gonna be like a month after he moves out. And I'm posting like wedding pictures with this weird cone. Like
it doesn't end well.
No, it
doesn't end well.
Oh, I should watch it. Yeah. No.
Have you haven't seen
it? No,
I've seen
it. No, yeah. Thanks for having me, guys. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. This has been Wet and Dry. If you're still listening, fuck off.
Yeah.
Woof. Harsh.